Trey Benson, the consensus RB1, at least by ADP, maybe even by expert ranking. It seems like I wonder if it's more of a fact of very few people that have him below 2. So like he comes out at 1 in the averages. He's got the size, 6 foot, 216, played at the big school. But are you sold that he's the best running back in this class?
I'm not sold, but I don't think I'm going to look back at this class and if he is the RB1 to be surprised. Right. I think that if you look at the positives, he did break tackles at a pretty good rate, especially 2 years ago. It was like insane how well he was able to force missed tackles. He has really strong athleticism. He had a great speed score. He has the size to be, an every down back. But there are some flags. And I think that, there's some people that might be ignoring the flags a little bit. Analytically, his best season reception share is under 10%. That 10% mark, totally subjective. I mean, this is not like you're over 10%, then you're great. You're under 10%, you're bad. But it's usually sort of a number that I want a running back to get to, because we usually do see any elite back easily clear that mark when they're in college. And so he was able to get to that 10% mark. His breakout score is 48.2, which is totally average. Now, he did tear his ACL early in his collegiate career, and so that forced some of that production to come later, and wasn't as great as a result of that. But at the same time, it's still something to note. And so if you look at day 2 backs since 2011 who had a breakout score below 60, so it's well above where Trey Benson's at, and a reception share below 10%. Here's a list of the day 2 backs while failing to hit those marks since 2011. Alex Green, Stephen Ridley, Christine Michael, Carlos Hyde, Matt Jones, Damian Harris, and Trey Sermon. So I just think that it's not great. It's not looking great. So I think the way that I view Benson is there's just a lot of volatility. I think there's some safer running backs you can go to in this class that might not have the same ceiling. It just depends on sort of what kind of risk profile you want to take on when you're drafting in your rookie draft.
It's interesting because you talk about safer running backs, but just from and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but from the mock drafts I've seen, from the running back rankings I've seen, if I'm thinking about safer in terms of who's going to go day 2, Trey Benson seems like everybody thinks he's going to go day 2. He just might be, you're saying amongst the backs who do go day 2, less safe?
Yeah, exactly. If I were drafting in my rookie draft right now today, I'd probably draft Trey Benson before any other running back, because we feel so good about draft capital being there for him, right? And so obviously if he goes day 2, if he goes in the second round, let's say, and only like a Jonathan Brooks goes on day 2 or something like that, and then all these guys just go day 3, then yeah, I mean, I think that there's a nice boost. That's why, draft capital is obviously part of the equation here as well. I just think that within the player, if you're evaluating the guy individually, and I know that a lot of people who break down film say that he's an inconsistent back who's not necessarily super decisive. I think that shows up a little bit in his production profile too. Even 2 years ago when he was forcing missed tackles at a really, really high, like I'm talking like, according to PFF, one of the best rates that they've seen over the last decade, right? He saw a shift in that even year over year. It's not, there just isn't that overall consistency with Benson, and that's what scares me a little bit.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. Let's be a little bit optimistic with Trey Benson here. Okay, he gets round 2 draft capital in whatever you think is the right situation, and kind of hits his upside. What do you think the 3 to 5 year forecast for Trey Benson, if everything goes right, looks like?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that if his upside hits and he falls into a decent spot as a round 2 running back, I think we're looking at probably a low end RB1 in Dynasty. I still think that's part of his range of outcomes, which I don't feel that way about some of the other guys we're going to talk about. So I do think that, the higher end outcome exists for Benson. I just also think like his top statistical comp in my model was Kenyon Drake. And I think that's sort of what we're looking at, where we saw flashes with Kenyon Drake, right? Like we saw him.
We had a Kenyon Drake moment for sure.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The fantasy community had a massive Kenyon Drake moment where he was a second round pick and redraft. And so I think that we could see that, but we know that Kenyon Drake had the tools. He had the athleticism. He was just so inconsistent week in and week out. And he would have these stretches where we're like, oh my gosh, like he could be pretty legit. And that's my fear with Benson, but I do think that imagine Kenyon Drake and that output that we saw being consistent, then obviously you can see that low end RB1 outcome.
Well, and that type of inconsistency, I think, because like one of the places that people will say is the best place a running back could go is they go to the Chargers because they're going to run the ball 600 times and they're going to have a good run scheme. Only they won't have a quarterback running it 30% of the time. So it's just going to be fantastic. Even with Gus Edwards there, a good rookie running back will put Gus Edwards in his place. I'm not sure that Trey Benson, especially with two coaches who value the way that Gus Edwards approaches things, that Trey Benson's going to take a lead role from like a Gus Edwards type, a veteran who just does everything the right way every play.
Yeah, I think that at the running back position in particular, because it is relatively replaceable in the actual NFL and even in fantasy, but I think that we can't necessarily discount. This is really hard to measure. This is totally subjective, but like I don't think we can totally discount like who would be a player's a favorite player of a coach, right? Like someone who is just going to grind it out, be very consistent. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why Seattle last year went and got Zach Charbonnet is not because Kenneth Walker is bad. It's that he's another inconsistent home run hitting runner. And that's what I think Trey Benson is sort of like, where I don't know. And his profile isn't unlike Kenneth Walker's to some degree. I mean, Walker's was better on the ground. His total yards per team play rate was much better than Benson. Walker's the better prospect than Trey Benson. Don't get me wrong, but they both sort of had like a middling to below average receiving profile. And they both sort of have this home run ability where you watch them and you're like, holy crap, the athleticism's there. The home run hitting ability is there. But what if you get Zach Charbonnet, if you're Trey Benson, if you fall to the right spot year one, and then those inconsistencies show up, and all of a sudden you have this low success rate and you're only this home run hitting back. And you know, fortunately for like Kenneth Walker, his market value has maintained for the most part. And so I don't, you know, from a dynasty perspective, it hasn't been that bad. Right. But that's the kind of running back that Walker is. I think it's okay to say that he's this big play, sort of like you don't know what you're going to get each touch, but you know that something crazy is going to happen.
You know, you're very unlikely to get a 2 to 4 yard gain. Like it's going to be a disaster or it's going to be awesome. Yeah. And that might just be the best way to end the Trey Benson profile.